Hello，你在线吗？我看 FB 的那个就是预播的那个文里面好像没有放到 YouTube 的链接，可以麻烦你帮忙补上吗？
Welcome to a new episode of Ross Night, hosted by the Asia Pacific Youth Association, a Taiwan-based organization that encourages students to participate in global events and global affairs. Every 2 weeks, we'll have a new episode available on our Facebook and our YouTube. Tonight, we're so honored to have as our guest, District Councilor from Hong Kong, Paul Zimmerman. We'll be talking about the recent Hong Kong Chief Executive election in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and other Hong Kong developments. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Paul, before we talk about the new chief executive in detail, one of the bigger stories in recent months in Hong Kong, of course, has been COVID. Maybe you could fill us in a little bit on the latest developments.
We just come out of a massive infection wave of infections in the last months. It has all subsided now. It's just we're down to a few hundreds a day. But we believe that Hong Kong is getting to a herd immunity. And so the question now really for Hong Kong is whether we open up to the rest of the world or open up to the mainland. When both mainland and Hong Kong were on zero COVID, it makes a lot of sense to have this ambition to open up with the mainland first and let the economy restart between Hong Kong and the mainland and make it easier for people to travel. But now we have a divergence. Hong Kong is really getting on the level of the rest of the world in terms of infections and herd immunity, and the mainland is still having to deal with this. They have to make sure that the infections don't go beyond the capacity of their hospitals, and so the mainland is going to be struggling for a bit. So now the question is whether the Hong Kong government can pivot to opening up with the rest of the world before opening up with the mainland, and it's not yet clear where they're going with that.
How do the views of the public broadly, the medical community and government policymakers align or not align on these issues? Is there a general alignment or are they starting to diverge a bit?
Well, we see a core within government and a hardcore within the medical community, a small hardcore that want to hold on to the zero COVID ideas. But I think in general, everybody has come around. People realize that, COVID is not going to go away. We can wish it away, but it's not going to go away. It's everywhere in the world except for a few places. And so everybody's there. We had a problem with our elderly population, same as in Taiwan, where there was a lack of vaccination, a lack of motivation to get vaccinated. And so that's where we see a high death rate in the last infection wave. Now we're past that, so the number of voices of people saying you got to open up, both from the left and the right in politics, as well as from the medical community, is increasing every day.
Well, what are some of the reasons why the elderly in Hong Kong developed this, in America, they would call it vaccine hesitancy?
Well, the vaccine hesitancy was throughout society. I mean, there was, and it was fed by this whole thing that we had zero COVID. So there was not a motivation to go. And so these kind of like concerns about vaccines and whether you should go or not, and the risk associated with it, had a lot of play for a long time in the community. And I think that's, and elderly people, you cannot change their mind very quickly. So this whole idea of jamming something into your body, and so the whole, for among them, those that the vaccine hesitancy prevailed for a long time. But now I think it's swinging around, and the government is now making a true effort by having a mobile teams visiting the elderly homes, because many of them are not that mobile, and the healthcare services we have in the elderly age homes, they're strapped for resources. They can't easily just pick everybody up and stick them into a car and take them into a vaccination center. So now that the government does the mobile centers, I think the vaccination rate will continue to go up very quickly.
Did these things tend to differ across neighborhoods? I mean, obviously, you're very close to developments on the ground in your constituency, whether it was outbreaks or vaccination levels. Did these things tend to differ across different parts of Hong Kong or Kowloon or the New Territories, or it tends to be uniform, whether it was outbreaks or vaccination rates?
Well, the outbreaks were consistently very high in areas with large housing estates and lower income population, higher density. Now, which one is the key factor in this? One will never know exactly, but that's what we're seeing. But it's slightly masked by the fact that it was people's personal choice whether they gonna report it or not, or that they're sick. So people that living in more expensive neighborhood had more space, and then also maybe less inclined to go and report it and just stick it out and were able to separate themselves from the rest of the family, where in housing estates, people were not able to do that. Maybe younger family members that got it were worried that the elderly would get sick, so they were more inclined to report it. So I think it's masked a little bit by those.
Well, one of the issues that elected representatives such as you have to deal with worldwide is the struggle of businesses, and certainly small and medium-sized businesses. What about in your constituency? What do you hear from small business owners, and how they've been dealing with on again, off again restrictions of the past few years?
Well, in my district, it's primarily residential. There's one very large employer, which is a government institution, Cyberport, so there's only a few smaller operators. But of course, my residents are involved in various small businesses or medium-sized businesses, and there is despair. The despair over the lack of travel. Many people's businesses depend on the ability to go and travel and connect overseas. And you do it for 1 year over Zoom when everybody around the world understood the reasons why you were doing it, but the rest of the world is moving on. And if you're still not traveling, still not touching base face to face with people, your business has troubles to survive. And so the same with people's ability to travel to the mainland and see the factories and so on. So that's not helpful either. So no, we see people are choosing with their feet now. So for 2 years, people were willing to stick with it. This third summer now, with COVID, people are packing up, especially among the more expatriate community and people that have overseas business interests. This is the summer that we see, and you can see it in town, less traffic, empty apartments. Even more telling is WhatsApp groups where people offering things for sale or and at very low prices, or even giving it away, giving away old cars because they can't sell them quick enough, and they just dump them into anybody who's willing to pick them up. And I think those signs are pretty telling.
I understand there's a number of vacancies for the normal number of district councilors that would normally represent your district. Does that mean you're picking up the work for multiple people and answering calls from more residents than you normally would?
Sure. I mean, I'm now getting calls from residents throughout Hong Kong, and especially the Hong Kong Island outside my constituency. People that are calling and ask for help. And there's only so much you can do, because you cannot split yourself over so many locations and resolve issues. So we try to direct people then to government services and give them a bit of help and a hint on how to self-help them. And so that's what we have to do with it. In our, I'm in the southern district, so that if I get calls from people in Stanley or in Sheko or whatever, I will work even harder trying to see whether we can solve it, because the issues, who the contact is, you can give some help. Get calls from different people that are COVID related, travel restrictions or vaccine pass issues. We're not asking whether they live in Pok Phalam. If those come in, we try to help them anyway. But yeah, so the pressure, you have more pressure in that sense.
Yeah. Did you get a bigger budget to add more staff to help with the?
No. I mean, government has lost interest in the district councils, and we are now we lack so many councillors that we really no longer representative, and the government has made clear that we're no longer representative, so they don't need to take our opinion that serious on issues that they would normally consult us on. So that whole role of the district council is kind of flatlining, and we'll have to see what the government wants to do. Does the government want to change the ordinance and ensure that there's only patriots only, or do they not want to do any more by-election to fill the seats, and therefore not even change the law, just ignore it and let it die? Or are they going to leave it as it is and then organize a by-election? I think that last option would be nice, but I don't think they will do that. You would get a stark difference in the rate of which democratic parties would be able to win seats compared to the Let's Go elections, and that could potentially be embarrassing. So I don't think that's going to happen. So then the issue is, will they continue the district council, or will they change the ordinance and then continue the district council? We'll just have to see.
Given all those factors and other than COVID-related issues, in a more recent period, what are some of the main issues, again, other than COVID, that residents are calling you about?
Those are, in my district, very much environmental related issues. Now the park where there's a construction project going on, noise from speeding cars at the middle of the night, because we have more road racing with COVID. People are bored, so they go racing around the streets and make a lot of noise. So very much the environmental issues are the ones that a district councillor gets to deal with. That, besides then the issue of Paul, help us make sure that the government understands they got to open up the city for travel. This is silly. We got to get moving again. That is, I think, the number one discussion that is around town, especially the southern district is a somewhat wealthier district in Hong Kong, and these people want to travel, and they're also in business, and they just realize that this ongoing kind of closure for COVID, on top of the whole this nervousness around the national security law, is really, really harmful for the overall business sentiment.
Well, let's talk about the chief executive special for the election for the special administrative region. One candidate, so it wasn't really an election per se. No. Was it expected that there only be one candidate, or even among the establishment, was it expected that there still be a battle between several establishment figures?
I don't think there was any expectation left on. Everybody was just kind of like waiting for the guidance to come down from above via the various channels on how everything would proceed. And so I don't think there was any expectation that anybody was having that there was going to be any real election in terms of having multiple candidates. Everybody was waiting for guidance, because the change that Hong Kong has seen in political reform and under the following the national security law has been dramatic, and was totally unexpected. So I think everybody went kind of mum and go like, okay, now how are you supposed to go ahead? So everybody was taking the back seat and be guided by what one wants. And it's clear Beijing has decided that patriots only, and they have drastically reframed the whole political system in Hong Kong, and so that's the choice they've made. And so now we have to see what that is going to mean. I mean, for me, I'm very interested in how we're going to run the city. And we've had a lot of problems running the city since 1982. So ever since kind of the top leadership in the city has been focused on the handover that started in 1982. They haven't really focused on running the city as a city, whether, like the mayor of London and the mayor of New York, or the mayor of Shanghai would do, because they don't have to worry about what's their relationship with the state. They just have to worry about, the traffic lights work and, the sewer system work, and they have to worry about practical things. And we see, therefore, in these other cities outside, we see very modern guidance on whatever street planning, street design, environmental issues, and in Hong Kong, we're working with outdated guidelines that really, if you compare them with the UK government documents, it's 1980s UK. It's like our transport planning design manual has been rewritten 2 times in the UK. It is now a manual for streets. We still have the document with a couple of minor changes that the UK produced in the 1980s. So, and the same on the planning side. So we have an outdated system of running the city because we've been so busy with the handover. So maybe that with this recent change, that we can truly focus on running the city as a city, but that still has to be seen that can come true, because that would be a good thing to come out of this. But I don't know. We have to see whether John Lee can deliver that.
John Lee, of course, has been a prominent public figure the last 3 years, both for his role in security and then his more recent government role prior to running for office as the chief executive. But earlier in his police career, was he also prominent? Was he known as a crime fighter going after some high-profile criminal cases as well?
His name was not familiar to me until he became chief secretary. Even as the responsible for security, it was not a very visible person, and I was not familiar with him as a person. And also, my relationship with government sorry, there's another phone call coming in. The interface with government is this harborfront design, protecting the country parks, improving walkability. So the kind of government departments that I deal with over my career here have been very much focused on development planning, transport, and environment, and not so much on other issues like security or politics or political developments and so on. Of course, I was interested, but it was not my day-to-day type of interface.
There was a lot of discussion about manifestos, lack of manifestos. When are these detailed things going to be released? What does he stand for? What are the issues he's interested in? But having watched several chief executive elections now, do these things actually matter? Or who's ever elected is going to go about governing, take it from there, and what was in a manifesto is actually not so crucial anyway.
I don't think it's. I think Carrie Lam had some aspirations set out in her manifestos, and CY had some aspirations set up, and they kind of try to follow through on them, and some of them have worked, others not. But in this last manifesto, the latest one, which is the one from John Lee, there is no particular ambition in there. There is clearly signaling to Beijing in terms of making sure that Article 23 will proceed, so national security will be looked after. He's really signaling stability to Beijing. He is reiterating issues like on land policy, which we all know, and Hong Kong always has this thing on land policy that is an important aspect that determines the economy and people's living environment and the cost of housing and so on. So that's an important one, but that's always a critical one that every chief executive talks about that. So there is no surprise in John's platform, and it really tries to speak of stability and slow progress, nothing dramatic. And so I haven't seen the inspiration yet that we're going to do. There is some clear choices in doing something drastically different because now we have somebody with strong backing from Beijing. It would be nice to see something strong and different because Hong Kong needs it. We need a pivot.
Did the public pay attention to the vote on Sunday, or they're too busy trying to emerge from COVID or enjoying warmer weather? What's the feel? Did people pay attention to the result?
No, nothing. I mean, it was predetermined. I mean, it was, it was not an event of any interest. I mean, the media tried to play it up a bit. There were some, long articles in there, but the media is very much pro-establishment and pro-government, and kind of under pressure to kind of, give some good coverage to it. But there were no surprises. There was no challenge. There was no battle. There was no surprise. So the people were much more excited about the fact that COVID had resided, the Omicron outbreak that we've suffered for the last months has resided, be loosening up all the rules and regulations again. So, we can get back to the beach, and we don't have to wear a mask in the mountain anymore. So I think that's something that captured everybody in Hong Kong more than anything else.
You said no surprises, but at the actual voting, was there more spoiled ballots than people expected, or protesters outside, or everything went as planned?
Yeah, I mean, I think 3 people with one banner, did a walk, and they had all the TVs there, but that was it in terms of protest. I was hiking the Lion Rock, and Lion Rock is famous for the unfurling of large yellow banners with a large text on it, and that had to then to be removed by the police. That has to come in with climbing gear to remove those banners. So the Lion Rock was famous for that. I hadn't thought about it, but as I hiked up the tail of the line, which is a particularly difficult route, and I came to the top of close to the line, it's had there was lots of police officers there. So they were really. Then I realized on the way up that I seen police cars somewhere in the neighborhood and so on. So there's a lot of police presence everywhere, fearful of any particular action. But even on the side of the public, I don't think there was anybody planning anything specifically around this election in terms of throwing up any opposition. Other, for obvious reasons. First of all, you end up in jail immediately, and it's a long time. So I don't think that anybody is very inspired to go and sit in jail. We have many of our Democratic friends already in jail for a long time, and there seems to be no end in sight for either minor transgressions. There was little motivation.
Let's talk a little bit about, or in more detail, about what Mr. Lee might do once he does take office. You had mentioned earlier the issue of opening the border to China and or to the world. Mr. Lee has said he'd like to open the border to China. That's a priority. How does that become a reality? I mean, what are the technical things or the medical issues that need to be resolved so that the border could be open to China with little or no restrictions?
Well, the only way to do that is following the same mantra as the mainland in terms of zero COVID. But that doesn't work very well. We had zero COVID on the mainland, and we had zero COVID in Hong Kong, and we were not able to open up. And I think it was Michael Chen, a local legislator, well known, who made it very clear when he was asked on the radio similar questions months ago, that to open up opening up to China means you got an agreement with the individual city or the individual region or the individual province. It's not a Beijing decision whether Shenzhen is going to open up to Hong Kong. It's a Shenzhen decision. The mayors of the cities and the heads of the governments of the provinces, it's their decision whether they open up to Hong Kong. And there are many reasons why they have concerns over that. They end up in serious trouble if they have an outbreak with COVID that they don't control. We see there's a lot of pressure on these governments, lower level governments, to to be very effective in their COVID management. So they're not going to take that risk. So this whole idea that we're going to open up with the mainland first before we open up with the rest of the world would mean that you kill Hong Kong, because you're not going to open up with the mainland for a long time to come until they've reached a herd immunity, or whether it's through vaccination, through natural infections. And so you're not going to open up with the rest of the world because you're waiting for opening with the mainland. And then you basically, as an international trading city, you're laying dead, and that kills the city. And that's what everybody's now very nervous about. So I hope that these small changes that the Hong Kong government has now done regarding travel, reducing the quarantine requirements slightly to a week, and reducing the pressure on the airlines in terms of making sure that they have the zero COVID passengers when they arrive. They can now up to 5 before there is some pressure on them, or 5% of the seat capacity. So by that is actually signaling to all of us that the government is doing a pivot, but doing it slowly, and not saying so. But I don't know. We'll have to see over the next weeks and whether the government really opens up and says, okay, we're going to open up. It's endemic here, and then we'll see what happens with the mainland.
Is there any possibility of a one-way opening up, that Hong Kong people could go back and forth easily, but there'd still be restrictions on Chinese entering Hong Kong?
Well, but all those things would be possible if that can be negotiated. But I think that it's very difficult for Hong Kong to negotiate with all these different entities on the mainland. It's not a national decision. If it was a national decision, it would be easier, but it's not. So as long as it's not a national decision, I think it's highly unlikely you're going to have very creative solutions. And so Hong Kong is better off opening first with the rest of the world. And then at some states, the mainland will also have COVID will also be endemic there, or people will be so extremely well vaccinated that there is very little risk to the healthcare system. But right now, the healthcare system is outside the main cities is still rudimentary in the mainland, and it will run out of capacity very quickly. So I think it's impossible for the mainland to open up generally very quickly, and they have to figure out a way of doing it slowly, and that will mean that Hong Kong will have to wait. I think it's a simple logic there.
You mentioned housing, and that's or the cost of housing. That's a perennial issue in Hong Kong, especially for the rest of us who are not wealthy.
I have to correct you there. 50% of the people in Hong Kong live almost for free because we got our public housing system. So I know this is always this issue of housing cost, but by now this city has almost 50% of the population in public housing living at very low cost, which is great for the industrialist and for business, because they can hire these people at low salaries because they're not pushing for their housing cost. And therefore, and that's the social problem that comes out of it. Therefore, you have a big gap between what the free market property looks like in financially and what people's salaries look like. Because the salaries of people that have to move from public to private, their salaries are based on what they pay for public housing. And now they want to move to private housing, then the salaries have to make this massive jump. And that's not easy. That restricts it to only a few people. And that creates a social issue that we need to address. So one hand, it's super successful to have all the public housing. On the other hand, there is an issue that wealth gap that we have created with that there is an issue. Of course, we have a shortage of supply, and we have overpriced housing, and we have to work on better development and faster development of residential units especially in the new territories where we have very poorly utilized land, and that we can use much better.
What are your expectations for Mr. Lee in this regard?
Well, he will continue the policies that have been put in place. Kerry has a development bureau background, and so CU has taken forward the Lantau Tomorrow project, which is a massive reclamation that not everybody's happy with, and it's very expensive. It's going to be very slow. And he has come around to what we have all said when Lantau plan was developed, that we should focus on on upgrading the development in the new territories where we have existing land, but lots of it is very poorly used with shabby structures, temporary land uses, car repair yards or plastic recycling yards or container storage, but nothing very tall, and environmentally of great concern as well. So to focus on that, but then the government has to negotiate with the Hungary Cook, the power of the landowners in the new territories, their representatives basically. It has to deal with existing relationship between the landowner and the tenants, and then those existing users. They, to what extent are you going to compensate them? So that's nitty-gritty work, much more difficult than having one contract with one engineering firm that builds one massive island. That is one contract. That's an easy one to sign. One guy can do it, but fixing the new territories takes a lot of people working very hard to get it. And so John Lee, he wants to proceed with those plans. He has no new alternative views on that, which is fine. I mean, these plans have been chewed through and talked about for a very long time. The systems are in place. The administration is shaping around it. So it's just a matter, can he deal with the technicalities and the initiatives that's going to require to develop the new territories? He may have to, what we believe, go back to older development models for the new territories that were used to develop Sha Tin, one of the earlier new towns in the new territories, when there was an overriding government agency and that all the other government departments have to report to them, the development unit, instead of what you have now, where everybody has their own powers and you have to kind of have a negotiated solution that makes implementation somewhat difficult. So that overriding agency for the redevelopment of the new territories is something that we're going to need, and I hope that he will understand that, and that's what he will do.
Along similar lines, speaking of lines, the MTR has continued to expand in recent years. There's ongoing construction as well. What is you had mentioned, though, that some of these plans are long-running plans and implementation takes a long time. But what are the expectations for infrastructure projects, whether MRT or roads?
The train and rail capacity has increased and will continue to increase, and I hope it will do so and continue to do so as fast as possible. So I don't have too many worries there. The road capacity, especially with the mainland, has increased dramatically. We have gone from a capacity of around 40,000 vehicles a day to a capacity of 220,000 vehicles a day. In the meantime, because of COVID, we're only using of all of that roadwork, we're only using 10% of the capacity at best at a good day. So the question really for Hong Kong is one that hasn't never been answered. We ask it at various fora. What are you going to do when we all open up all those routes with the mainland, and COVID is past and people are traveling? Then what? How can Hong Kong as a cul-de-sac, as a dead end, how are they going to cope with all of that vehicle input into a city that is so dense and has never expanded its local network within the urban areas? Because you can't, except for tunneling under through, which we're trying to do, but that is only limited opportunities. How's the city going to work when all that traffic comes in and out? And that question has never been answered, and we will continue to ask that.
Other infrastructure projects that might be discussed in your view, besides rail or road? Is there? You mentioned parks earlier.
Our airport capacity is there, so that's fine. Rail, we can do more, faster, and better, and we should. On the road capacity, we really got to rethink. It's more the intelligence than the infrastructure needed, probably. that's on the environmental side. Water supply. Where's our fresh water coming from? It's from upstream. There's less water coming into Dongguan. The kind of the system that we're using, that we're tapping into. There is more users on the mainland side along the water inflow that we're tapping into. And so, what is the future water supply for Hong Kong, and how are we going to reshape that? That's a big question. We do some experiments with a desalination plant, but that's really minuscule. Then on the energy and local air pollution side, so where are we going to go with, where's our energy going to come from, and how do we make sure it's clean? So there's this issue of gas terminals, and is that sufficient, or should we work with the mainland on more nuclear power to have clean, reliable energy? And then how reliable is that nuclear power? So those kind of questions need to be resolved in terms of infrastructure.
Other than COVID and Article 23 or infrastructure, well, if you had to take a guess, what other issues might John Lee be interested in? Is he interested in education, childcare, elder care?
I don't think that John Lee himself personally has a very broad agenda, or specific agenda. But it's probably the better term. I don't think he has such a specific agenda on a greater number of issues. I think that he has a broad idea about what's right and wrong, and that issues that need to be addressed. So the question really is he going to find an interesting team that's going to bring in the talent and the ideas that he's going to need in his team to take the city forward? So the next couple of weeks, months, until what I expect to be Xi Jinping to come to Hong Kong and kind of like anoint him the powers as chief executive of Hong Kong, that we're going to be all watching and looking and seeing what the rest of the team is going to look like, and that's going to be the interesting one.
Who takes those kinds of jobs? Not mentioning specific names, but given all the recent developments, COVID, social unrest, who joins the government? What kind of person wants to give up their current job and become a secretary?
Well, I don't know whether it's now going to be easier or more difficult, but this whole thing about joining government has been a challenge for people to kind of accept it. And if you're in the commercial sector, then why would you go across when you have all these opportunities to go around the world and you don't have so many risks of being criticized? So I think that's been around for a while. Are people now going to be more comfortable with NSL in place and a different system that they can feel more comfortable to take on the post, or are they going to feel more at risk because they have a more dedicated boss who might be ticking on their fingers and say, "Excuse me, you messed that up. We didn't particularly like what you were doing there." I really don't know. I'm sure they will be tapping again into the existing bureaucracy and find talent there. But from outside the bureaucracy, who's interested? I don't know yet, and I will have to see. And if I haven't seen, so the question isn't of DAB, the kind of local, whatever we call it, the blue party, whether they are going to provide a lot of talent for the government. I don't know to what extent that talent has a lot of governance experience or in-depth topical experience, and whether there's an environmentalist in there that really knows the issues. I don't know, and I'm just going to wait and see and see who pops up. From our perspective as activist NGO and on these environmental issues, we will take whatever opportunities comes around to go and educate the new Let's Go, and reach out to the new government to see whether they're interested in our ideas for how recycling is done and how the country parks provide a better help for the community, how we can get a better and more beautiful promenades around our harbor, and how how all of these ideas are just really good for everybody and therefore good for government. So will reach out to whoever comes into the seats.
You mentioned Lechko and DAP, one of the blue parties. What's the scope for members of Lechko to question, criticize, conduct oversight of the new government going forward?
Well, technically a lot to ask questions and put pressure, but if they are not willing to go public with their questions, then maybe their power is not going to be so great, because then these kind of things, it's sometimes you want a shortcut bureaucratic hesitancy because of rank differences or people sitting in different departments and they don't work well together and all of that. If you want to overcome this kind of that kind of thickness in the system, usually it's going outside to give it a bit of a kick via the media, and then it gets exposed and people start asking questions, and then the government can start running. If they're not going to do that, then my answer to your question would be then their powers will not be that great to steer. So it really, for me, is going to be interesting to see whether among those 90 Lechko members, there are some people that are going to be, they have to stand out from the crowd. They have to stand out from among the 90. Whether they're going to do that by using their elbows and shout a bit louder and get some of the public behind them. So again, we have to see the first months of this new Lechko have been very quiet. I mean, there's hardly anyone that stood out in any way on any topic. So for now, it's been disappointing, but maybe it's because they didn't know who the chief executive was going to be, and everything is still to settle. So my hope is that they're all going to use their elbows, try to get a bit more attention for themselves, and trying to be the hero. And because we need people to kind of fight to stand out, and then it would help. But if they're not going to do it, then it's going to be very flat lining, and then we're not going to develop new ideas so easily. You need people to fight with each other to get new ideas.
You mentioned earlier people leaving Hong Kong, leaving for good. How does the new government slow that pace of exits down?
I don't think they're slowing it down with specific measures, other than that it's you cannot easily get a flight, and you can't easily get back if you do get a flight to come back, because you do have the quarantine requirements, and so it costs you a lot of money to fly and travel and to sort yourself out. So what COVID has made difficult is for people to go and explore the opportunity of living somewhere else. And so people are then forced to this binary choice, where they're forced to kind of stay and hold on. But then when they make the decision to go, they're really going, and then there's no turning back for them. And I think that as far as the international minded people in Hong Kong, whether they expats or Chinese, they would have loved to stay here. And then when they make a choice to go, then they have found another job and have a real plan. They're not going to come back so easily anymore. They're not going to be spokesperson for all the greatness of Hong Kong. That expats would always leave, Chinese people would always leave Hong Kong and tell everybody else how fantastic Hong Kong is. And they're not going to do that this time. So it's not going to be a great advertisement to pull more other people to come here. And then on the people that were not international oriented, young students just out of school, born in Hong Kong, haven't traveled a lot. So that kind of audience. I mean, these people that have packed up because of fears about national security, again, they once they've made that decision, and it's quite drastic, they're not easily just going to go and then come back again. So there is some anticipation on the Hong Kong government side that people leave temporarily and then they come back. I think they misunderstand that new people may come with new expectations, but people that have left is, I think at this stage, talent lost that is not easily going to come back, especially because there is still no end in sight. Every 2.5 years into COVID, and there's still no end in sight. And so people cannot count on things anymore. They're going to put their kids in school as well. They're going to get different jobs, and they're not going to make a temporary move overseas. I have a particular example where friends who have a financial investment company, and they moved temporarily to Singapore. They rented a place there. They kept their home here, and they recently sold their home in Hong Kong because there's no end in sight. It doesn't warrant for them to not sell their place because it's expensive to have multiple places going at the same time. But also they had discovered that Singapore is working for them because by now they've been there for long enough to make it work for them. So they're not going to make the investment to come back again easily. It's done. It's over. I mean, it's so it's I think it's going to damage the Hong Kong economy for some time to come. Doesn't mean that Hong Kong is dead. The moment COVID is over and the mainland border opens and all of those road connections and rail connections can be used to their full capacity, Hong Kong will swing and boom, and it will all, will go crazy here again. It will be very different, but it as an economy, it will revive, but it will be very different.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I saved one of the tougher questions for the end. If you meet Mr. Lee and you had a chance to bring up one issue with him, what would it be?
For me, that is making the city an easier city to enjoy in terms of walkability and a public space. That's because that's personally an area that I'm most interested in, and I think that Hong Kong needs to continue to focus on that because we have a very high density city. Traffic is compressed into a very short road network that's also used for all the piping and tubing for our infrastructure and water supply and electricity and telephone cables and whatever. So you have to really figure out as a city how we can make optimal use of that. And if we do that right, we become a model for other cities around the world. So I think that Hong Kong has some exceptional, well-developed areas in terms of high density development where people walk below ground, at grade and above ground, and all these networks interconnect extremely well. And that is something that other cities still have to learn to cope with. And I've seen, and I've been present here where people come here from New York, planners and government, to look at how Hong Kong works. And then we all went back to New York and had the same discussions there. And there's just so much they learn from Hong Kong. And so to me, it's a strength of Hong Kong that we should exploit and become better and better at. And then we can be an example to the world, and we do good to Hong Kong. And then we're a great city for the nation as well. So focus on that would be my recommendation.
Okay, well, we've been chatting with Hong Kong District Councilor Paul Zimmerman about the recent chief executive election and the future of Hong Kong. Paul, thank you again so much for joining us today.
All right, thanks for having me.
And please tune in for future episodes of Ross Night hosted by the Asia Pacific Youth Association. New episode every 2 weeks on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you again and good night.